What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and to my Stage 4 Power Rankings. I can't believe we're already entering the final stage of the 2019 Overwatch League season. Time really does fly when you're having fun. This stage in particular is going to be very interesting because it's essentially a new game with the 2-2-2 roll-lock being a thing. I'm not gonna lie, and yes, this is a disclaimer when I say that a lot of these rankings are guesswork. It's hard to predict where some of these teams are going to be in the rankings when the meta is completely different, and because we haven't really seen some teams play much DPS. Think of the overall playoffs last year. I'm pretty sure a majority of experts did not believe the London Spitfire would be so dominant in the bunker double sniper meta. We can assume that a team is going to be good or bad all we want, but at the end of the day, we won't know for certain until we see everybody play some games. Since this meta is going to be drastically different, my rankings will only be slightly based off Stage 3. Okay, I believe that's everything I wanted to cover in the intro, so without wasting any more time, let's get started. So coming in at my number 20 spot, I have the Florida Mayhem. New meta and new rule set or not, this team is still a mess. Saya player potentially dominating the competition on Widow is definitely intriguing, and I think that Fate could do well in a meta that will involve a good amount of Orisa, but the bad seems to outweigh the good with this team, and there's so many unanswered questions with these guys. Will guys like Zephyr and BQB be able to step up their game this stage if they get any playtime? And their new pickups Rain, DPI, Gargoyle, and Carrion are still unproven, so it's unknown if they'll be any good or not. The combination of a not so great roster and all of these question marks makes me believe that Florida may end up struggling yet again. Next up, I have the Washington Justice, and before anybody throws a fit, hear me out. Yes, there's a good chance the Justice end up being better this stage, but there's a few reasons why I can't put them higher up right now. While everybody is very excited about their new tank line of Losich and Elivote, they haven't actually played a game in the league yet, so I don't want to assume that they're going to live up to the hype until they actually prove themselves. Also, coming into Stage 3, I kind of expected the Justice to be a little bit better since Sleepy and Ark had now had time to be on the team for a while, but that did not work out the way I expected it to as they went 0-7 obviously, but this team has shown flashes. Sleepy and Ark should still be a solid support line. Then there's also the DPS. Corey and Stratus have shown a lot of flashes on hit scan and projectile respectively, but they've been inconsistent, and I refuse to believe that they'll change until I see some more consistency from them. But even though I have some things that still need to be answered about these guys, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Justice end up having a decent stage. Their schedule, after all, has a lot of winnable games on it, and people such as Otto, Corey, and maybe Janice, if it gets playtime, won't be detrimental for the rest of their team. There's no need to worry about these guys making horrible mistakes and sticking to bad habits on Brig, Zarya, and Reinhardt respectively since Goats is now dead. Corey and Otto could more than hold their own against a lot of the other DPS players in the league, and it would be hard for Janice to overextend if he's playing behind a shield the whole time as Orisa, because it is assumed that Orisa is going to get a lot of the playtime for main tanks. So again, I'm not saying the Justice are definitely number 19 right now, but they'll have to prove themselves by looking competitive this stage. Rolling in at number 18, I have the Paris Eternal, and before you get angry at me, Paris fans, I want you to listen to what I have to say. Yes, it's true they went 3-4 in Stage 3, but I honestly see this team struggling to end the year off. They take on some tough opponents, and I don't have a lot of confidence in some of their players. I believe the DPS should be able to hold their own since Soon, Shadowburn, and Danye are pretty good, and Crew should do pretty good on main support again, but I do have a lot of concerns still when it comes to their tank line and flex support position. Ben Best was a little bit better in Stage 3, but it was nothing really to praise, and I don't know if him or LH Cloudy will be good enough on Orisa. Finzi has proven to be a decent flex tank, but he's a little inconsistent for my liking, and then there's the flex support spot. I know some people really like Gray, but I don't think he's lived up to the hype, and I don't believe his Ana or Zen will compare to a good chunk of the flex supports in the league in Stage 4. Unless these players prove me wrong, then I believe the Eternal are doomed to fail this stage. As good as their DPS players are, I don't think they'll be enough to carry hard enough to save their team from getting a not so good record this stage. Moving on to my number 17 spot now, I've got the Boston Uprising. This team is definitely a very interesting case, I feel. It's honestly hard to say if they'll be any good or not. It's all going to depend on if they can get their support line issues sorted out and if their DPS can show up on a regular basis. Color Hex and Blase have both had pop-off moments this year, but there's also been times where you can't really feel their presence much at all. Having Stellar as a third option could potentially solve this if it ends up being an issue, but nothing is guaranteed. Kind of like with pretty much every other team before them on this list though, Boston could definitely be better than where I have them. The league is in a very unpredictable state right now, so many of these teams that I expect to be middle of the pack or worse could very well end up being good. Coming in at number 16 is the Dallas Fuel. Yeah, I know, crazy. ATP not having the Dallas Fuel in the top 10 is just unheard of, and believe it or not, but my reasoning behind Dallas being this low doesn't really have to do with their 1-6 performance in Stage 3. It's more that I don't know how they'll do in any sort of Orisa setup. OGE has always been a solid Winston and Reinhardt, but his Orisa is more of an unknown. It's hard to tell if his Orisa will be up to par with some of the other heroes in his arsenal. I still have concerns for Zachary too. I think he'll do fine if he's playing Hanzo or maybe Junkrat, but what if the team needs him to flex onto, I don't know, like Pharah for an example? Can he actually look impressive in these types of situations where his team needs him to flex a lot? Or is he going to continue to be that same kind of inconsistent player who seems to disappear in big games a lot? I'm a little worried about AKM and Taimu not doing hot sometimes as well, but it's a little reassuring to know that they can basically do what they did last year, where whoever is doing well plays while the colder person goes to the bench. A combination of all these factors, plus a tough Stage 4 schedule and seeming kind of mentally boomed by the end of Stage 4, makes me believe that Dallas could be in for yet another really tough stage. Up next, I've got the Toronto Defiant, and while it is true that these guys are coming off a winless stage, I feel that a 2-2-2 meta will allow this team to play to their strengths. This team was not very good at any form of GOATs once Stellar left, but one thing they clearly do well with is DPS. Logix and Mangachu are already looking like they could be difference makers for their team, and the likes of Ivy and or I'm37 could very well end up being added back into the mix to make for a killer DPS rotation. This team has good pieces all around too though. Neko's always been a pretty consistent flex support player, and Yakpung has looked a lot better as of late. Toronto is in a very similar situation to the Justice. They have a pretty kind schedule this stage, and they appear to be on the rise, but I don't want to assume they'll be good until I see them win some games with my own eyes. Moving on to my number 14 spot, I have the Chengdu Hunters. I know it may seem like a surprise to have them so low since 2-2-2 plays to their strong suit, but I believe that some teams who were once worse than them are going to take big strides in the right direction this stage. So it's not that I believe the Hunters are getting worse, it's more that other teams are getting better. But don't think that means I'm counting these guys out. Jinmu and Yangzhou Long should make for an even deadlier DPS duo now that they don't have to play Brig and Zarya anymore. I'm sure that Among will find ways to dominate on both Wrecking Ball and Orisa as well. I wouldn't be shocked at all if the Hunters have themselves a good stage to end the year off strong, but with them taking on some really good opponents, there's also a good chance they finally have less than 3 wins in a stage. This team has a good opportunity to show that they shouldn't be taken lightly. Don't let your fans down, Hunters. At the number 13 spot, I have the Guangzhou Charge. I, for one, believe this team is very much on the rise. They ended Stage 3 off on a really good note by outplaying the Shanghai Dragons on DPS. Happy and Nero appear to be working very well with one another, and I'm sure they'll be extremely dominant anytime the Charge run double sniper. And I'm sure that Eileen could be of use too if the Charge decide to give him more playtime. I have confidence in the likes of Shu, Rio, and Hoppa as well, but there are a few things I'm uncertain about when it comes to this team still. For one, I have no idea if Chara will ever be more than just an average main support at best. Throughout this entire year, he has done absolutely nothing to impress me, but to be fair, he hasn't done much to make me think he's bad either. Chara's kind of just there, and that could be seen as a good thing since he's not doing anything bad, but at the same time, it also means he'll be unable to match up against the top tier main supports in the league most likely. There's also a reason to have concerns about Fraggy and Bishu. If they are indeed incorporated into the lineup, will they be able to fit in and perform well? I know the obvious answer would be yes since they're decent players, but who really knows? For all we know, they could end up messing everything up if they get a lot of playtime. If Chara can become more than average, and the Charge's new players can fit in well if they're utilized, then the Charge should honestly be kind of scary. I already think they'll be good as it is, but if they make my concerns about them go away completely, then I'm confident this team could be even better than where I currently rank them. Next up, I've got the Houston Outlaws. After a 5-2 stage, this team seems to be trending in the right direction. These guys are at their strongest when they play DPS comp, so I have confidence that this team could be a middle of the pack team bare minimum. With how scary Linkser is on Widow and with how much Jake and Raucus have improved, it's hard to imagine that these guys won't at least be somewhat competitive in Stage 4. And the Outlaws could still use Dante too for situations where the team needs a Sombra or a Tracer. He can play Hanzo and Pharah as well, so the Outlaws could run him over Jake if they'd like to. Either way, I think a double sniper comp with Muma on Orisa could be really good for the Outlaws, and since Bonnie is a better Mercy than Boink, there's a good chance that he gets reincorporated into the rotation. There is one problem I have with the Outlaws though that keeps me from putting them up higher on the list, and if you're wondering what I'm so nervous about, then I have 3 words for you: Cool Matt and Spree. Both of them have been horrible on Diva this year, and it's hard to imagine they'll suddenly become reliable unless they undergo some magical transformation like Raucus and Jake did. And I honestly have no idea if either of them can play a good Roadhog. I haven't seen Cool Matt play that hero in what seems like years, and I don't believe I've ever seen Spree touch Hog before. I'm worried that potentially lacking a good off-tank is going to hold them back. But other than that, the Outlaws are still looking pretty good. I just don't see them hanging in there with the top tier teams. Rounding out the bottom half of the standings, I've got the Atlanta Reign. Go ahead and get your butt ATPs out now, because I'll tell you right now, I don't care if Atlanta had a poor Stage 3. And it's really not as bad as people think too. Yes, they did go 2-5, but they were competitive in a majority of the sets they lost. And that's saying something when you take on the likes of the Dragons, Shock, and Titans. But anyway, this is yet another team that could seriously end up benefiting from the meta change. Someone like Babybay, for an example, can play to his full strength now since he doesn't have to worry about wasting Graviton surges or having them get eaten while playing Zarya. Instead, he can strictly show off how amazing he is at hit scan. Erster could also be a major threat. The man showed off incredible versatility in contenders, and I expect to see more of the same now since he isn't stuck in Brig Jail. And who knows, Maybe even Enlier finds some time on stage again. He's a pretty good hit scan player himself. Another reason I really like this meta for the Reign is because Pokebo and Dako feel very comfortable using the Orisa comps and dive as well. This was supposedly the case in Contenders, and they've looked pretty good with it during the few moments we've seen it in the Overwatch League too. I'm expecting the Reign to be just as competitive this stage, but probably with a few more wins under their belt. Alrighty, 10 teams down, 10 more to go. Next up is the Philadelphia Fusion. Now that Goats is dead, the Fusion, in my opinion, are going to be so much better. While Sato is still going to be the main tank for them, there's no need to worry about him feeding on Reinhardt. He'll mostly just be playing Orisa and Winston if my predictions on the meta are correct, and it's kind of hard to feed when you're stuck behind a shield a lot. Plus, we know he can play a decent Orisa because of the playoffs last year. I'm not saying he's anything crazy, but he definitely wasn't a complete weakness on his team either. I'm sure that Carpe and EQO are also more than excited to be on DPS again. The return of that deadly double sniper comp that got them into the finals could be on the horizon, and maybe this new kind of meta will allow Kib to get some playtime on his new team. The only other thing we need now is that Neptuno Battle Mercy, and it'll feel like the good old days. Coming in at my number 9 spot is the London Spitfire, and they are basically in the same situation as the Fusion. Now that GOATS is over, they get to run some of those comps that helped them get to the finals in 2018. Birdring once again gets to kill it on the Widowmaker, while Prophet dominates the competition on whatever he feels like playing. Jester playing a lot more Orisa also sounds promising since he was arguably the number 1 Orisa in the league last year. I also feel that London is going to follow a very similar trend to last year. In 2018, they had 2 good stages and 2 bad ones. So far in 2019, they've had 2 bad and 1 good. So it would seem that they're overdue to play well again this stage. More DPS should, or at least I think, will allow them to start winning more games. London needs to do well if they want to stay in the top 6. Let's see if this team still has that same clutch factor from last year. At the number 8 spot, I have the Seoul Dynasty, and as good as Seoul's been this year, I feel that they're going to fall off very slightly. It's not that Seoul's gotten worse, it's more that other teams in my opinion are going to benefit more from the 2-2-2 lock. Don't get me wrong, Seoul will still be solid, but I don't know what to expect from them since they have such a tough schedule. Seoul will still be good. After all, Fleda's about to be unleashed full-time on DPS, but I wanted to be safe with my ranking on them because I'm unsure of how they'll do against top-tier competition. Also, I really don't know if they'll be any good at dive without Munchkin there to play Tracer. Okay, next up is the Gladiators, and this is yet another team that could very well be on the rise in my opinion. We finally get to witness Decay dominate as a full-time DPS player. Combine him with Surefour and Hydration, and you've got yourself a deadly DPS rotation that could pretty much play anything you'd like, whether it's Bunker, Dive, or something else. The Gladiators are in a bit of a tough spot though. My ranking for them could very easily go down or up depending on how things go against some of the top tier competition they play this stage. I'm reluctant to put them higher up for that reason alone. They've shown that they can handle the mid to low tier teams, but they tend to crumble against the top tiers at the same time. Getting dominated by the NYXL, Shanghai Dragons, and Vancouver Titans is proof of this, and there's a whole bunch of other strong teams that have shown a better ability to hold their own against these types of foes. So until the Gladiators prove to me that they are different now, they will stay at my number 7 spot. Kicking off my top 6 is the Hangzhou Spark. We haven't really seen much DPS from the Spark this year, so it's really difficult to say exactly how good they'll be, but based off of what I've heard from pro players, the Spark were actually really good at DPS comps and scrims. Plus, Godsby, Adora, Bozzy, and Crystal are all very talented DPS players, so I'm sure they'll do fine regardless of what the comp is. I'm not going to lie, a dive comp where Gooch weighs on Winston sounds really scary. But anyway, different meta or not, I believe the Spark still should be a pretty dominant team. Coming in at number 5 is the LA Valiant. I believe that this team is very well suited for a DPS-oriented meta with a good amount of Orisa. Whenever the Valiant ran DPS with Fact Fiction on Orisa on Stage 3, they looked pretty good. KSF and Shax are both very capable hitscan players in that role, and then Agilities can play Projectile at a pretty high level. And with Space now getting playtime again, I don't see the Valiant really falling off much with how good of a diva and hog he is. The Valiant have the tools to succeed, but I feel that they fall short compared to the final 4 teams on my list. Moving on to my number 4 spot, I have the Vancouver Titans, and before you start a riot in the comment section, hear me out. Yes, the Titans are really good, but I fear that a bunker style comp could really be tough for them to master at first. We haven't really seen Vancouver use this type of composition much, so I don't know if they'll be any good at it, and Bumper hasn't really played enough Orisa for me to gauge if he's good at her or not. And while I do think these guys will likely still be a tough team to beat, I don't know for sure how they'll do with DPS. I know they used to be pretty good at DPS in Contenders, but I don't know if Stitch, Haxel, and Salmon 2 can keep up with the DPS talent on other really good teams in the Overwatch League. Don't get me wrong, Vancouver still should be very good. They're a very talented group of guys and their synergy is top notch. I just feel that they may take a little bit of time to catch up to some of the other teams I have ahead of them right now. And speaking of those teams, starting off the top 3 is the NYXL. But ATP, this team does nothing but choke in the playoffs, blah blah blah. Yeah, I know, but think about it like this. They can't choke in the playoffs this stage because there are no stage playoffs. Plus, they tend to perform well in the regular season, which is evident by their 19-2 record. I also feel that having more DPS involved will allow the NYXL to play up to their true potential. Mono, Meko, Jonek, and Animo is still a really good core, and they're absolutely loaded at DPS. Their DPS is a big reason why I feel they're going to do slightly better than Vancouver. Now they aren't just limited to Nene, Libero, and Sabiobi. They have the option of running Flower and or Pine as well. This team is just versatile on DPS in general, like it's ridiculous. Libero and Flower can play pretty much anything, then Nene, Pine, and Sabiobi are also very skilled hits game players. It's hard to imagine this team not being close to the top when they have so many weapons. If you want a good Tracer, then you can play Sabiobi or Nene. If you're in need of a good Genji or Pharah, then Libero and Flower will have your back. And it also helps that literally any one of these DPS players can play Widowmaker. This team will have an ideal DPS combo regardless of the situation. Now, I will admit that the NYXL were not that amazing at Bunker in Season 1, and that Mono is not great at Orisa, but I think they'll manage still. They're far too talented to not be at least top 5 in the league in Stage 4. Now, please don't make me eat those words, NYXL. Anyway, at my number 2 spot, I've got the San Francisco Shock. I know that some people believe that they're going to fall off because Super is not that good on Orisa or Winston, but I personally feel like they're going to be just fine. If Super works hard to improve like he did with Reinhardt, then there's no need to be concerned. And if all else fails, the Shock could always play Smurf instead. Also, the Shock are in a very similar spot to the NYXL. They are so unbelievably loaded at DPS. They've got a world-class Tracer and Widow player and Striker. Architect and Rascal can pretty much flex onto anything, whether it's hitscan or projectile, and Sinatra is pretty insane too. And if it's anything like the Stage 3 finals, then Choi Yobin in either Super or Smurf will probably be very successful using the Orisa Hog combo. The Shock are equipped for just about any situation. They can play any tank, support, and DPS combo in the game at a fairly high level. So I think the Shock are going to do just fine. I don't expect them to drop off like others seem to think. Okay, now we move on to my number 1 team, which by process of elimination is the Shanghai Dragons. While these guys don't have as many options like the Shock or NYXL do for an example, we've already seen what these guys are capable of on DPS comps. After all, they dominated in the stage playoffs with them. Plus, it's kind of hard to go against Diem and Ding since they're arguably the number 1 DPS duo in the league right now, and they look pretty good everywhere else too. Gamsu can play Orisa, Wrecking Ball, and Winston at a very high level. Koma and Luffy have been playing some of the best Overwatch of their career as of late, and Youngjin is a very capable flex who can play both Hog and DPS. My one worry about these guys though is having to reincorporate Envy into the lineup since he could end up messing up their synergy a little. If the flex tank position ends up being a little weakness for the Dragons, they may slide down a bit in my rankings, but I get the feeling it's not going to matter because I'm getting some fusion vibes with the Dragons right now where the DPS end up willing their team to victory even if somebody's holding them back. I could end up being very wrong here since these are all just guesses after all, but that's how I feel right now. They've already proven that they are very much ready for 2-2-2. I expect them to pick up exactly where they left off in the playoffs by dominating the competition in Stage 4. And with that being said, that is going to wrap up my Overwatch League pre-Stage 4 power rankings. I know that some of these rankings may seem a little crazy, but it's important to remember that I have no idea what's going to happen. It's essentially a brand new game. We can infer which teams will be good and who's going to be bad all we want, but it's impossible to know for certain until we see some games get played. Remember, I'm not claiming to be an expert on this. I'm just a guy on the internet giving his honest opinions. So if you do think any of my rankings are a bit far-fetched, then that's okay. But if you disagree down in the comment section, do it respectfully, please. There's no reason to get triggered over somebody else's opinion. Okay. That's pretty much everything I had to say, so if you enjoyed this content, then I would appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe. As always, thank you all so much for watching today's video, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.